Coming up on the Capitol Crossfire, the government may be shut down, but political news sure isn't. On this episode, two debaters go head-to-head sharing their takes on the shutdown, the National Guard being deployed to U.S. cities, and so much more. Plus, we hear from GW students about their opinions on the latest news.
Joining us today for our discussion is Matt Lowe, a junior here at GW who is a fellow on the Spanberger gubernatorial campaign in Virginia and a contributing writer to NextDem's Party Playbook, as well as Preeti Kulkarni, a senior majoring in international affairs who identifies as a centrist and has worked for several organizations with a focus on democracy.
I'm Tiffany Fong.
And I'm Ava Hidalgo.
From the GW-TV studios in Washington, D.C.
This is Capitol Crossfire.
Thanks, Tiffany and Ava. Welcome to today's discussion. I'm Brady Wilson, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Since the clock struck midnight on October 1st, the U.S. federal government has been entirely shut down, as Democrats and Republicans in Congress have yet to come to an agreement on health care. We are now over 2 weeks into this shutdown, with almost no sign of the government reopening anytime soon. But before we get into this debate on this topic and so many others, let's hear from Devin Gilbert on what the shutdown actually entails and what it means for you.
The federal government has been shut down since October 1st, 2025, with no end in sight. Smithsonian museums have closed their doors, military families are worried about their next paycheck, and travelers are dealing with understaffed airports. But what exactly is a government shutdown, and why does it happen? Here's what you need to know. A government shutdown happens when Congress fails to pass funding legislation before the start of a new fiscal year. That deadline was October 1st. Without approved funding, federal agencies can't spend money, which means they can't pay employees or keep many operations running. Not every government service comes to a complete stop, however. Social Security checks still go out, Border Patrol agents stay on duty, and air traffic controllers keep working. But here's the catch. Many of those essential workers aren't getting paid during the shutdown. Their paychecks are on hold until the government reopens. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of federal workers get furloughed, which means they're sent home without pay. So who's feeling the impact right now? Military families are at the top of that list. Service members were bracing for a missed paycheck this Wednesday, October 15th, until President Trump announced Saturday that the Pentagon would use research and development funds to cover military pay. That's a temporary fix, but it means money meant for defense innovation is now going to paychecks instead. If you're traveling this week, you might face delays. The FAA said 6 air traffic control facilities are short-staffed. Controllers are working without pay, and the strain is showing up in flight schedules. Planning to visit a museum in Washington? The Smithsonian's 19 museums and the National Zoo closed their doors Sunday after staying open for nearly 2 weeks using reserve funds. Those reserve funds have now run out. And if you were hoping to deal with the IRS, you're out of luck. The agency began furloughing its staff last week, and most operations have shut down. That means longer wait times and now major complications heading into the 2026 tax filing season. Federal workers across the country are either furloughed at home or working without knowing when they'll be paid, if at all. During his first term in office, President Trump signed the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019 after a 35-day shutdown, the longest in U.S. history. The law, which passed Congress with bipartisan support, is meant to ensure that in the event of a government shutdown, federal workers receive back pay once government funding is restored. During this shutdown, however, the White House Office of Management and Budget argues that back pay is not automatically guaranteed for furloughed government employees. In a memo circulated on September 30th of this year, a senior OMB official was quoted saying, "Does this law cover all of these furloughed employees automatically? The conventional wisdom is yes, it does. Our view is no, it doesn't. For many families, that means impossible choices about rent, groceries, and bills that will remain until Congress strikes a deal. So why haven't they?" Both the White House and congressional Republicans are blaming Democrats for the funding impasse, as most Senate Democrats have voted against the GOP's plan to keep the government open through November 21st, with no indication of giving in. Democrats say cuts to healthcare subsidies included in this plan will dramatically increase healthcare costs for millions of Americans, and they refuse to vote for a plan until said cuts are off of the table. Both sides are blaming each other, and neither is budging. The House hasn't been in session for over 3 weeks, with Speaker Mike Johnson refusing to reconvene until the Senate comes to an agreement. Meanwhile, the Senate returns this week to consider new proposals, but there's no clear path to reopening the government, as neither side is willing to negotiate on health care. For millions of Americans, that means the impacts of this shutdown will only get worse. As the shutdown stretches into its second week, pressure is mounting on Congress and the White House to strike a deal. For now, federal workers remain in limbo, services stay shuttered, and Americans across the country continue to feel the strain. Lawmakers are expected to return to Washington later this week, but without a breakthrough, there's still no timeline for when the government will be reopened. For GWTV, I'm Devin Gilbert.
Thanks so much, Devin. Now let's get to our debate. Matt and Preeti, welcome to the show. The U.S. government recently shut down following Congress's failure to pass an appropriations bill for the fiscal year. A recent poll found that 86% of Democrats blame Trump for the shutdown, and 82% blame Republicans in Congress, while 73% of Republicans blame Democrats. Why do you believe it is responsible for the government shutdown?
So I guess I can start us
Yeah,
off.
go ahead and start whenever
I
you're
will
ready.
start with reminding people who are watching, who controls the White House? Who controls the Senate? Who controls the House of Representatives? Republicans. And they know that they need 60 votes to pass any continuing resolution to keep funding the government. So instead of coming to Democrats and negotiating a bipartisan package to continue government funding in good faith, they advanced a partisan wish list full of pork for their wealthy donors, whose taxes they already cut at the expense of people relying on Medicaid over the summer. And it's also worth reminding people that Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva from Arizona still hasn't been sworn in, despite having won her special election back in September, because Mike Johnson knows that she will be the deciding vote to get enough signatures to get the discharge petition to release the Epstein files to the floor. And Mike Johnson and Donald Trump don't want that to happen. So why should Democrats put in any effort to negotiating any sort of package to continue government funding when there are constituents who elected a Democrat into office last month already, and she still hasn't been sworn in? Democrats should not budge until those 800,000 plus people in Arizona have the representation that they're entitled to.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I really appreciated your point about a bipartisan bill. I think it is important that we characterize our political culture. It's one of intense political polarization, and instead of necessarily putting excessive responsibility on either or party, although I am inclined to agree that this particular government shutdown is because of the current administration and its offshoots, I think where we should really focus our priorities to is coalescing a bipartisan coalition on getting this healthcare bill passed. This has been an ongoing issue for the past decade or longer, and because of that, there's so much political apathy within Congress that is now spilling over into our general political community. So I'm inclined to agree, but maybe for different reasons.
Thank you both. Political News reported that during the government shutdown, Trump has announced that $8 billion will be shifted so that military troops are paid. Does he have the constitutional authority to divert funds in that way, or should Congress have a say? You want to start, Matt, off?
Sure. So the short answer, based on my interpretation of the Constitution, is no. If Congress has allocated funding for a specific set of programs laid out in congressional legislation, that's the way that it ought to be spent. I don't believe that he has the constitutional authority to do any of these cuts either related to DOGE or diverting funding for his own purposes. And now he's talked about potentially giving $40 billion to Argentina's government to help them with whatever their economic chaos is. And that would fund the Affordable Care Act tax credits for a full year. And it's kind of hypocritical if you think about what he campaigned on just last year. He ran on America first, always putting American people ahead of the needs of other countries. But since getting into office, he's proven time and time again that what he's actually done is put his buddies abroad, whether it's Putin or whether it's Milei in Argentina, putting their needs ahead of the needs of Americans.
Thank you. Preeti?
I'm inclined to agree, shocking, but I think that in this particular context, I have a similar interpretation of the Constitution that Congress controls funding, period. And in this particular diversion of funding for the National Guard, I mean, he's excessively criminalizing every city. And as someone who has a liberal school of thought, who believes in freedom proper and who believes in liberalism proper, that goes against that essential doctrine to our country. So even though there could be an argument made, I really don't see validity in it because it's going against our founding principles in such a obvious way.
Thank you both. In a recent video, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem publicly blamed the Democratic Party for the government shutdown. The video was set to play in airports on TSA security lines' TV screens. However, several major airports have refused to play Noem's video. Do you think federal government agencies should engage in this type of speech? If Preeti, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think that this is a very interesting question because it kind of calls into question the bounds of freedom of speech. How can governments interact with it? Do governments have their own distinct voice? I think every administration has its own distinct voice, but I think these agencies are well within their rights to not display such rhetoric because they're engaging in the marketplace of ideas. If they choose to, they can show that, but their choice to not is equally as important. It's equally as important as Kristi Noem's choice to make said video. So I think that government agencies especially are able to create their own voice, and I think that within that, they have the right to not display such rhetoric.
Thank you. Matt?
I'm going to go a step further. I don't just think that they have the right to choose not to display such rhetoric or such videos, but I think they have an obligation to say, we're not going to show this to people coming through our facilities, because this is a very clear violation of the Hatch Act. It's not surprising coming from a president who repeatedly violated the Hatch Act in his first term and even boasted about it to his followers at his rallies. So it's very, very clear in federal law that independent agencies engaging in this type of rhetoric and this type of political speech is illegal under federal law. And Kristi Noem doesn't really, you sort of alluded to, she has the right to engage in this speech. No, she doesn't really, because her job is to oversee TSA, to oversee all of these agencies that are dedicated to serving the American people, notwithstanding any political agenda or any affiliations. Not to mention that that video is full of complete and utter falsehoods. They make this claim that Democrats are shutting down the government to give health care to illegal immigrants. It's not true. In order to apply for these ACA tax credits, you need to have a social security number. You know who doesn't have a social security number? Illegal immigrants. So one, the claims in this video are not true, and two, and more importantly, this video, creating it and releasing it, is illegal to begin with, and it's a violation of the Hatch Act.
Thank you so much. When we come back, we'll discuss some of the latest updates from the Trump administration. But first, our out-of-studio team, led by Cassidy Corey, takes to the streets to hear what GW students have to say about the shutdown.
Once you enter the Foggy Bottom metro station, you are about a 15-minute ride away from the United States Capitol. With this proximity in mind, many GW students have seen the effects of the government shutdown unfold right in front of them. Today, I'm headed out to Kogan Plaza to get a sense of what students are hearing and seeing, along with where they think the shutdown will be heading.
Archway, walk sign here, on to cross. Archway.
So I definitely think the government shutdown did not have to happen, considering that the Republicans control all three parts of the government currently, and they're the ones kind of pushing this government shutdown and at the same time blaming it on Democrats. I think the whole thing is terribly managed and there's a lot of misinformation going on.
I think it's very polarizing because both political parties are blaming each other for it when it's really a collaborative issue.
In high school, I learned a lot about what a shutdown is, but I haven't lived through one, obviously. And being in the city where it actually happens is pretty crazy because everybody here either works for the federal government or has a connection to it. So just seeing how empty the streets are recently has been quite a culture shock.
Nobody really wants to be the first one to do anything about it, even if that means giving up a little bit of your side. But yeah, I think it just really shows the stress of the polarization in our society, which is really unfortunate.
I think trying to place the blame on a certain group of people will only make it worse and more polarized.
The Republican Party has kind of now, they don't care about telling the truth anymore, and I think that is happening on both sides of the aisle, obviously. Democrats definitely have a responsibility to actually get up and do something about it.
I think working together is really the main part of the fact that we should focus on right now. But I think today's day and age, it's really polarized. I think that it's hard to find that common ground, and it really is going to take some cooperation from both sides. It's really up to everybody to decide what's at stake, which are human lives and the country being in a safe place at this moment.
I think Democrats need to, I know they're already fighting to reverse the shutdown, but I would like to see some more fervor from them. But yeah, I definitely think Republicans and partisanship are to blame.
It's just kind of one of those situations where everybody's done something wrong and there's no one truly to blame because both sides, I think, are in the wrong. And it truly can be seen from either direction. So because of that, I do think that everyone just needs to come together and put aside their beliefs and just figure this out.
I think for DC residents, we feel it a lot, seeing as so many things here, are government funded, like recreational parks. There's more trash in the street now. Just like the local politics side of it is definitely upsetting and like frustrating.
The biggest effect for me is all the museums shutting down. I am a frequent museum visitor, so those not being open to the public is really disappointing. I do know that one of my Spanish professors has been personally affected by the shutdown. He gives Spanish tours at the National Portrait Gallery. So a lot of people that are not English speaking cannot access those kinds of tours. So I think that's disproportionately affecting those people that don't speak English or want to have a tour in Spanish.
I read stuff on the news about how people are losing their jobs, losing their income, and that's really unfortunate because at the end of the day, they're still Americans, and the fact that they're being affected by such a avoidable problem is just really frustrating.
I think it's really awesome that the DC community really comes together during these times, and you're seeing happy hour being offered more at restaurants and discounts being given to government workers, and just a general tone of empathy for those who are still working to keep our government operating.
I hope it's not that long, but I do have some lingering fear that it might last longer than we expect it to. But I'm hoping by the end of the month, it's over.
I don't think it can take a while. I think it should be something that the government is actively working on to resolve.
I think we're at a pretty politically polarized moment in American politics, and I think this is definitely a flashpoint. I think it's also, if you want to see the glass half full side of that, this is an opportunity and something that is impacting real people in a way that we can come together. Well, I say we, it's not up to us, but Congress can come together and resolve something for the benefit of everyone's constituents. But I think if I'm being honest, it's a frustrating time for someone to be in the US and to see what's happening and feel like nothing is changing because there's just too much polarization.
The Trump administration is kind of using the shutdown as a way to further its own goals. They can stop any votes that they want from happening, any bills that they don't want passed, for instance, all the things surrounding the Epstein files, obviously that's been stopped in its tracks right now. So not necessarily say they're going to attempt to prolong it for as long as possible because the economy is going to die. But I think there won't really be attempts made to necessarily fix the problem.
I think it's going to take a little more time until things are resolved, just because right now there's a lot of finger pointing and both sides are just not happy about it.
People have to want to work together to end a shutdown, and when you're seeing the two sides still attacking each other. For example, both of us were doing research on government websites, and the message that comes across, I know you saw it like on USDA,
Yeah, it's
is
like due to the radical
Yeah.
left Democrat
and I
government
think
shutdown.
the longer that we characterize either party as radical, the less capable we are of coming to consensus.
You got that right.
And with that, let's move on to the Trump administration. After President Trump deployed the National Guard in Portland and Chicago, both deployments were temporarily blocked by federal judges, but the National Guard troops can still remain under federal control. Do you think the president should be able to federalize and deploy state National Guard troops in U.S. cities? Why or why not? If you want to start us off, Matt.
Sure, so it doesn't really matter what I think. It matters what's embedded in existing federal law. And the Posse Comitatus Act makes it very clear that, no, the President of the United States does not have the authority to send military into our cities and into our streets to act as law enforcement. It doesn't matter if he's doing it in the name of cracking down on crime, which is actually down significantly in all of these cities. What matters is that he doesn't have the authority to do it. He doesn't have the constitutional authority. He doesn't have the statutory authority. He can't do it. But he's doing it anyway because he knows that his buddies on the Supreme Court aren't going to do anything if he says, I don't care what the courts say, I'm going to do whatever I want anyway. And it's very alarming for the state of our democracy and the separation of powers that he was able to do this in California, that he was able to violate the Supreme Court's order to facilitate the release of Kilmer Abrigo Garcia just a few months ago. And if any of you think that Donald Trump has any intention of stopping anytime soon, you've got another thing coming. This power grab is only beginning, and it's growing at an alarming pace, and this is just the start.
I was just going to say that I agree entirely. I think that federalizing local and state National Guard is just one of the many ways Donald Trump is trying to do a power grab categorically. And I think militarizing is an interesting way to do it. Not interesting in that it is very, it's very within his rhetoric, and I think that just in agreement, I think it's a real alarming point. It's a real flashpoint for our democracy if the sitting president is able to federalize state and local troops and kind of impact the flow of federalism and how our state functions.
Thank you both. In just the past 2 months, former FBI Director James Corney, New York Attorney General Letitia James, and most recently John Bolton, former advisor to President Trump, have all been indicted. When career prosecutors at the Department of Justice refused to charge these cases, they were removed in their positions and replaced. Do you think that these indictments should be justified and the U.S. attorneys who refused to hand them down have been dismissed? I'm going to start with Preeti.
I'm inclined to agree that these indictments are justified, especially in the case of John Bolton. I also want to call to attention the fact that Donald Trump has been using this as a way to attack his political opponents. Just recently, he called for the indictment of Adam Schiff with no leeway on that or no progress on that. So I agree with the process of the indictments. I think that they needed to happen, and the fact that Donald Trump is using this as a way to attack his political opponents further continues on the trend and the theme we've been discussing throughout this debate of how he's really trying to amass a power grab and threaten our democracy.
Thank you. And Matt, if you want to give your thoughts.
So Donald Trump has had it out for both John Bolton and Letitia James since his first term, and even for Letitia James since his days as a private citizen. Being from New York, having grown up in New York with Letitia James as my attorney general for the longest time now, I know that they have had a long-standing feud because Letitia James rightfully civilly prosecuted Donald Trump for the fraud that was Trump University, fined them billions of dollars, and Donald Trump has had it out for her ever since. So now he campaigned both in the primary and the general election on taking retribution against his political enemies. How many times? Many. And he was very critical of John Bolton after Bolton criticized his conduct during the first term, criticized his handling of U.S.-Russia relations, was very close to even testifying in that first impeachment trial about that phone call that he bragged about withholding military aid from Zelensky to try and get him to investigate the Bidens. So he also, it's worth noting, made this same allegation about Lisa Cook, the Federal Reserve governor, whom he wanted to fire. And the fact that he fired all of these U.S. attorneys who refused to prosecute the case tells me that there is zero evidence whatsoever that she or Bolton committed mortgage fraud or whatever these crimes are that they are being accused of. And it's also worth remembering, Donald Trump is a convicted felon, 34 counts of felony-level fraud. So it's not worth taking him at his word when he says that someone else is committing fraud, because he's already been convicted by a jury of his peers in the state of New York.
I would like to call attention, though, to a political article I read about John Bolton's indictment specifically. While I agree with you regarding the others, specifically the mayor of New York, I would like to call attention to that specifically because it mentioned 18 unclassified documents about relations in Cambodia. And I think that while I agree with you, I think that Donald Trump is not in a place to really jurisdict what is fraud and what isn't. I do think that condemning that and condemning the mishandling of classified documents is important, even though I do agree that Donald Trump is not a good case study for that.
Yeah, thank you guys both for your thoughts. This week, over 30 major U.S. media outlets, including CNN and Fox News, walked out of the Pentagon after Secretary Pete Hegseth implemented new rules requiring government pre-approval for any reporting about the Department of Defense. Should the government ever have the power to decide what information can or cannot be published about itself? If you want to start with your thoughts, Matt.
Yeah, so this is a very, very clear violation of the First Amendment of freedom of the press. We've seen it from Trump before, threatening to revoke broadcast licenses for networks that broadcast coverage that he disagrees with, threatening the status of mergers and acquisitions between private media outlets unless they fire or cancel shows and personalities that have said negative things about the president. It's just another page out of the authoritarian playbook, and I think that's pretty clear that that's what he's doing here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to agree. It's a clear violation of the First Amendment, and I especially appreciate you bringing up how he's been consistently infringing on the press's right to engage in discourse about his presidency, specifically anyone who makes a direct criticism at him, and I agree. It's another page out of the authoritarian playbook.
Thank you both. Recently, a ceasefire deal between Israel and Palestine was brokered after 2 years of conflict in Gaza, with President Trump helping to renegotiate and negotiate. Meanwhile, Trump plans on meeting with both Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin in the coming weeks, suggesting that Putin may be open to a deal. Do you think that the president deserves any credit for the Middle East deal, and will Russia be open to a diplomatic solution? If you want to start with this.
Sure. So on the Middle East front, I don't really care about credit at all. I'm just happy that the war, at least tentatively, has come to an end, and more than anything, I'm incredibly grateful that the hostages have finally been released, that the families that have been waiting agitatingly for so long finally have their loved ones come home. And for those that unfortunately didn't make it all this time in Hamas captivity, that their families now finally have closure and they can move forward in their lives. For those that did somehow manage to survive 2 years in brutal captivity in those conditions, incredibly grateful for their perseverance. I'm in awe of it. And I don't really care whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden that gets the credit. I'm just glad to see those hostages go home to their loved ones at the end of the day.
I am inclined to agree. I don't think it's really about credit. I think the fact that we're even at this vantage point is very needed, and I'm very grateful for that as well. I also want to highlight a bipartisan moment, which I think really touches on the importance of this solution, regardless of party line and regardless of who necessarily orchestrated it. Biden congratulated Donald Trump on this particular deal, and I think that that was something really impactful and a moment that we seldom see in this political culture. So I think we could have a large discussion about who gets credit for this. Donald Trump also is claimed to orchestrate a ceasefire between India and Pakistan in Kashmir. Both heads of state have conflicting thoughts about that. There is a wide scope of discussion we could have. But I think the fact that we even have this as something to stand on, as ground to stand on, is what we should focus on.
Yeah,
Thank you.
100%. And I also want to add, because you mentioned the situation with Russia and Ukraine, so I would like to share my thoughts quickly on that front. It's pretty clear that, as he has been for all this time, maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not, but Vladimir Putin has played Donald Trump like a fiddle. Putin has sold him lie after lie after lie, hook, line, and sinker. And I don't know, maybe there's some Epstein connection. Maybe Putin has some sort of dirt on Donald Trump for all these decades. There is some evidence that points to that. But Trump is incapable of standing up to Putin. Every time you think that he is prepared to do so, he comes right out and he rolls out the red carpet. He has our soldiers giving their lives to this country on their hands and knees in Alaska, rolling out a literal red carpet for the Russian dictator. And Putin is on record calling the Soviet Union collapse the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He's been very clear that this conquest isn't going to stop at Ukraine. He's already violated NATO airspace in Poland and in the Baltics on many occasions this year. If he takes Kyiv, he's setting his eyes straight on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland, starting with the Baltics, and starting with the Nordic countries. If we don't stop him now, he is going to move forward in his attempt to recreate the Soviet Union. It's pretty clear he's got no interest in a diplomatic solution. Otherwise, he would have negotiated with the West before even invading Ukraine in the first place.
I'd also like to make the point, I think Donald Trump's close friendship with Vladimir Putin is also a page out of the authoritarian playbook. There's an international affairs theory called democratic peace theory, where it's said that democracies coalesce together and often form mutually beneficial relationships. And I don't think that that's exclusive to democracies. I feel like with authoritarian regimes, we kind of see that interplay as well. And I think that's just Donald Trump trying to diverge the United States from its previous global standing, its previous seat as the global hegemon, as the global pinnacle for democracy, and pushing it towards a isolationist, highly hyper-nationalist state. So I agree with you entirely, but I also think there's an international affairs caveat that I wanted to.
Yeah. Thank you guys both for all of your discussion and ideas about the Trump administration. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Preeti and Matt, thank you so much for joining us and for a wonderful conversation. We hope to see you back here soon. Now let's go back to our hosts for a fact check.
Thank you, Brady. Now for the fact check. Earlier in the show, Matt made a claim that $40 billion was provided to Argentina amid their financial crisis. According to NBC, at the moment, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is currently working to provide Argentina with the funds. However, this has not happened yet.
Additionally, Matt made a claim that all of the federal prosecutors targeting Donald Trump were fired. Some of these prosecutors actually resigned before this could happen.
Well, that's all for this episode of Capitol Crossfire.
Be sure to check us out online at www.gwtv.com and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at GW Capitol Crossfire.
For all of us at GWTV, I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Ava.
Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us.
We'll see you back here next time.